The morning sun barely touched the windows of the Thornton mansion as Maria pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway. 3 years she'd been working here, and the house still felt as cold as the day she'd first walked through its doors. Sure, it was beautiful with its high ceilings and expensive paintings on every wall, but beauty without warmth is just decoration. She paused at the music room door, like she did every morning. Through the small gap, she could see the grand piano sitting in the center, untouched and perfectly polished. In 3 years, she'd never heard anyone play it, not once. It seemed like such a waste, keeping an instrument like that silent. Maria had grown up with music. Back in her small town in Mexico, her grandmother had taught her to play on an old upright piano that had seen better days. Those were good times, filled with laughter and melodies that made even the hardest days bearable. But life had other plans for her, and now here she was cleaning houses instead of making music. She shook her head and got back to work. The Thornton house was huge, and Mr. Thornton expected everything to be perfect. He was the kind of man who noticed a single book out of place or a cushion turned the wrong way. Not that he was ever home long enough to notice much. He spent most of his time traveling for business, managing his investments, attending meetings in cities she'd never been to. His son Daniel was 12 years old and spent most of his days alone. The boy had been blind since birth, something Maria had learned from the other staff members during her first week. They'd whispered about it in the kitchen, about how Mr. Thornton couldn't handle having a disabled son, about how the boy was practically invisible in his own home. It broke Maria's heart every time she saw Daniel sitting by himself in the library or the garden. He had a tutor who came 3 times a week, and a nurse who checked on him daily, but that was about it. No friends came over, no birthday parties, no laughter echoing through the halls, just silence and staff members going about their duties. That particular afternoon, Maria was running behind schedule. One of the guest bathrooms had needed extra attention, and she still had the east wing to finish. She decided to save some time by cutting through the music room instead of going around. That's when she heard it. Not music exactly, but the soft sound of someone crying. Her hand froze on the door handle. She pushed it open slowly and saw Daniel sitting at the piano bench, his small fingers resting on the closed keyboard cover. His shoulders were shaking and tears were running down his cheeks. Maria's first instinct was to back out quietly and leave him alone. It wasn't her place to interfere with the family's private moments, but something about the way he sat there so small and alone in that big room made her feet move forward instead. "Daniel," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. "Are you okay, sweetie?" The boy's head turned toward her voice. He wiped his face quickly with his sleeve, trying to hide the fact that he'd been crying. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice was thick with emotion. Maria set down her cleaning supplies and walked closer. "You don't sound fine, and that's okay, you know. Sometimes we all need a good cry." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, as if the words had been building up inside him for too long, they came tumbling out. "I asked my father if I could learn to play piano. I asked him months ago and again last week when he was home. He said no both times." "Why did he say no?" Maria asked gently, sitting down on the bench beside him. "He said it would be a waste of time and money." Daniel's voice got even quieter. "He said someone like me couldn't really learn to play, not properly. He said I should focus on things that are more realistic." Maria felt anger rising in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "Someone like you? What does that mean?" "Someone who can't see." Daniel turned his face toward the piano. "He thinks I can't do much of anything because I'm blind. I heard him tell my tutor once that he just wants me to learn enough to maybe work in a call center someday, or something simple like that." The words hit Maria like a punch. She'd known Mr. Thornton was cold, but this was something else entirely. This was a father who had given up on his own child. "Can I tell you something?" Maria said, reaching out to gently touch Daniel's shoulder. "Some of the greatest piano players in the world were blind. Have you heard of Ray Charles? Stevie Wonder? Art Tatum?" Daniel shook his head. "They were all blind, and they made music that millions of people loved." "Your father is wrong, Daniel. Being blind doesn't mean you can't play piano. In fact, some people think it might even help, because you can focus on the music without any distractions." "Really?" For the first time, there was a hint of hope in Daniel's voice. "Really," Maria said firmly. "I used to play piano when I was younger. I'm not a professional or anything, but I know the basics, maybe even a bit more than the basics." Daniel turned to face her fully now. You play piano? I used to. My grandmother taught me back home in Mexico. We didn't have much money, but we had that old piano and we had music. It was one of the best parts of my childhood. Could you... Daniel hesitated as if afraid to ask. Could you teach me? Just a little bit. I wouldn't tell my father. I just want to know what it feels like to play. Maria knew this was dangerous territory. Mr. Thornton had made his wishes clear, and going against them could cost her this job. She needed this job. The money she made here helped support her sister's family back home and paid for her tiny apartment in the city. But looking at this boy, this lonely child who just wanted to learn something beautiful, she couldn't bring herself to say no. Okay, she heard herself saying. I'll teach you. But we have to be careful. Your father can't know about this. The smile that spread across Daniel's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you so much. When does your father usually come home from work? Maria asked, already planning in her head. Around 7, but sometimes later. And he travels a lot, so some weeks he's barely here at all. And your tutor? Your nurse? The tutor leaves at 3. The nurse checks on me at noon and then again at dinner time. After dinner, I'm usually alone until bedtime. Maria nodded. Okay, starting tomorrow after I finish my regular work, I'll come find you. We'll practice for an hour each day. But Daniel, you have to promise me something. This stays between us. If your father finds out, we both could be in trouble. I promise, Daniel said solemnly. I won't tell anyone. I swear. As Maria left the music room that day, she felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. She was about to do something that could change this boy's life or ruin her own, maybe both. But when she looked back and saw Daniel sitting at the piano, his hands now resting on the keys with purpose instead of sadness, she knew she'd made the right choice. Sometimes doing the right thing means taking a risk. And sometimes, Maria thought, a maid can change a millionaire's son's life more than all his father's money ever could. Tomorrow, the lessons would begin. Tomorrow, the silent piano would finally have a voice. The next afternoon, Maria's hands were shaking as she knocked softly on Daniel's bedroom door. She'd spent all morning second-guessing herself. What if she couldn't actually teach him? What if Mr. Thornton came home early? What if this whole thing was a terrible mistake? But when Daniel opened the door, the pure joy on his face made all her doubts disappear. You came, he said, his voice filled with relief. I was worried you'd changed your mind. I gave you my word, didn't I? Maria smiled, even though he couldn't see it. She'd learned that smiles changed your voice, and Daniel could hear everything. Are you ready for your first lesson? They walked together to the music room, Daniel's hand lightly touching the wall to guide himself, a path he knew by heart. Maria had already checked the house thoroughly. Mr. Thornton was in New York for 3 days. The cook was busy preparing dinner in the kitchen at the other end of the house. The gardener was outside. They had at least 2 hours before anyone would wonder where they were. Okay, Maria said, settling onto the piano bench beside Daniel. First things first. Give me your hands. Daniel held out his hands and Maria placed them gently on the keys. The piano has 88 keys, white ones and black ones. The black ones are raised up so you can feel them easily. Can you feel that? Daniel's fingers explored carefully. Yes, the black ones are in groups. Some groups have 2, some have 3. Exactly. Maria was impressed. That's perfect. Those groups are going to be your map. They'll help you find your way around the keyboard. Middle C is always just to the left of a group of 2 black keys. Find it. It took Daniel a few tries, his fingers moving across the keys with increasing confidence. Is this it? That's it. Middle C, that's going to be your home base. Maria pressed the key, letting the note ring out. Hear that sound? That's C. Now let me teach you something my grandmother taught me. Music isn't just about hearing. It's about feeling. Put your other hand flat on the top of the piano. Daniel did as she instructed. Maria played the note again, this time pressing harder. Feel that vibration? That's the music traveling through the wood. When you play, you're not just making sound. You're making the whole instrument come alive. For the next hour, they worked on just 5 notes, C, D, E, F, and G. Maria taught Daniel how to curl his fingers properly, how to press the keys with purpose but not force, how to count out a steady rhythm. She'd forgotten how much she loved teaching, how satisfying it was to watch someone discover something new. You're a natural at this, she told him honestly. Your grandmother would have loved teaching you. Tell me about her, Daniel said during a short break. Your grandmother. What was she like? Maria leaned back, letting the memories wash over her. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, but she had this huge personality. She used to say that God gave her a small body so there'd be more room in the world for her music. Every evening after dinner, she'd sit at that old piano and play. The whole neighborhood would open their windows just to listen. Is that why you became a maid? Daniel asked suddenly. Did something happen to her? The question caught Maria off guard. Nobody in this house had ever asked her about her life before. She was just the help, invisible unless something needed cleaning. She passed away when I was 17, Maria said quietly, and then my father got sick and we needed money for medicine. I had to make a choice between continuing my music studies or helping my family. It wasn't really a choice at all. I'm sorry, Daniel said, and the way he said it made Maria believe he truly understood loss. Don't be sorry. I got to play piano for years because of her. I got to love music because of her. And now I get to share that with you. Maybe this is why everything happened the way it did. They practiced every day after that. Maria would finish her cleaning duties by 3:30, and then she'd slip into the music room with Daniel. Some days they had 2 hours. Some days only 45 minutes before the nurse came by or Mr. Thornton returned home unexpectedly. Daniel improved faster than Maria had thought possible. By the end of the first week, he could play a simple melody with both hands. By the end of the second week, he was reading music through a method Maria had discovered online, using raised dots and patterns that helped blind musicians learn. She'd spent her own money at the library, printing out articles about famous blind pianists. Every lesson, she'd tell Daniel stories about these musicians, how they'd overcome obstacles, how they'd proved everyone wrong. Daniel would listen with his whole body, leaning forward, absorbing every word like it was oxygen. Did you know that Art Tatum could play faster than most people could even think? Maria told him one afternoon. People said it was impossible for anyone to play that fast, let alone someone who couldn't see the keys. But he did it anyway. Because he didn't let being blind stop him, Daniel said, his fingers moving across the keys as he spoke. Exactly. He didn't let anyone else's limits become his limits. One day, about 2 months into their lessons, something shifted. Daniel was practicing a piece they'd been working on, a simple arrangement of a folk song. Suddenly, he stopped following the notes exactly and started adding his own touches. Little flourishes, slight changes in rhythm, making the song his own. Maria sat perfectly still, afraid to interrupt. This was the moment every music teacher waited for, when a student stopped just copying and started creating. When Daniel finished, he turned to her with an uncertain expression. Was that okay? I know I changed some of the notes, okay? Maria laughed. Daniel, that was better than okay. That was you finding your own voice. That's what music is really about. From that day on, their lessons changed. They still worked on technique and learning new pieces. But Maria also gave Daniel freedom to experiment, to play with the melodies, to discover what kind of musician he wanted to be. The transformation in Daniel went beyond just piano playing. He started standing up straighter. He smiled more. He talked about the future with excitement instead of resignation. The lonely, sad boy Maria had found crying at the piano was becoming someone else. Entirely, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. Mr. Thornton's travel schedule had been unusually busy these past months, but eventually that would change. Eventually he'd be home more often. Eventually he'd notice that something was different about his son. What do you think will happen if your father finds out? Daniel asked her one day, as if reading her thoughts. Maria had thought about this question 100 times. I don't know. He might fire me. He might be angry with both of us. Would you stop teaching me? If he said you had to? Maria looked at this boy who had become so much more than just her employer's son. He was her student, yes, but also something like a friend. Definitely someone she cared about deeply. Let's just hope it doesn't come to that, she said, avoiding the question because she didn't know her own answer. But if it does, Daniel said firmly, I want you to know that these lessons have been the best thing that's ever happened to me. Even if we have to stop tomorrow, you've already given me so much. Maria felt tears prickling her eyes. You've given me something too. You've reminded me why I loved music in the first place. You've made me feel like more than just a maid. They practiced for another hour that day, both of them pushing away thoughts of what might happen. In that moment, in that room, they had music. They had progress. They had each other. But outside the music room, in the world of expensive mansions and wealthy businessmen, time was running out. Mr. Thornton's next business trip had been canceled. He was coming home early, and neither Maria nor Daniel had any idea what was about to happen. It was a Wednesday evening when everything changed. Maria had checked Mr. Thornton's schedule that morning, the same way she always did. He was supposed to be in Chicago until Friday. She and Daniel had planned to work on a new piece, something more challenging that Daniel had been excited about all week. The music room was filled with the warm glow of the late afternoon sun as Daniel's fingers moved across the keys. They'd been practicing for about 40 minutes, and he was playing beautifully. The piece was Chopin, a simplified version. Maria had arranged herself, but Daniel was playing it like he'd been trained by professionals. "That's it," Maria encouraged, standing beside the piano. "Remember to let your wrist relax on that part. Feel the music flow through you. Don't force it." Daniel nodded, his face concentrated but peaceful. This was when he was happiest, Maria had learned. When he was playing, the rest of the world disappeared. He wasn't the blind son of a wealthy man who'd given up on him. He was just a musician, pure and simple. "Let's try it again from the top," Maria said. "And this time, don't worry about mistakes. Just feel it." Daniel placed his hands back on the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The music filled the room, each note clear and intentional. Maria closed her eyes, listening. In just 5 months, Daniel had progressed beyond anything she'd hoped for. He had something special, something that couldn't be taught. He had soul. Neither of them heard the front door open. Neither of them heard the footsteps in the hallway. They were too lost in the music. Mr. Thornton had left Chicago early. The meeting he'd been dreading got canceled, and instead of staying in a hotel room alone, he'd caught an earlier flight home. He was tired, frustrated with work, and looking forward to a quiet evening in his own house. But as he stepped into the foyer, removing his coat, he heard something that made him freeze. Music. Piano music. Coming from the music room. At first, he thought he'd left a radio on, or maybe one of the staff was playing music on their phone, but as he listened more carefully, he realized the sound was coming from the grand piano itself. Someone was in there, playing his piano, the piano that hadn't been touched in years. His first emotion was anger. Who had the audacity to use his things without permission? But as he walked closer to the music room, the anger began to mix with confusion. Whoever was playing knew what they were doing. The music was complex, classical, beautiful even. He reached the door and stood there, his hand on the doorknob, listening. Part of him didn't want to interrupt. It had been so long since he'd heard live music in this house. Not since his wife was alive, but he needed to know who was in there. He turned the handle and pushed the door open. The scene before him made no sense at all. There was his son, Daniel, sitting at the piano bench, his hands moving across the keys with confidence and skill. And standing beside him, her hand resting gently on the piano, was Maria, the maid who'd worked for him for 3 years and whose last name he couldn't even remember. The music stopped abruptly. Daniel's hands froze mid-phrase. His head tilted, slightly the way it always did when he was trying to understand something he couldn't see. "Father?" Daniel's voice was small, uncertain. Maria turned to face Mr. Thornton, and he saw the fear flash across her face. She straightened her shoulders like someone preparing for battle, but her hands were trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Mr. Thornton stood in the doorway, unable to move. His mind was racing, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Daniel was playing piano. His son, the boy he'd assumed would never amount to much, was playing Chopin, and playing it well. "How long?" His voice came out rougher than he'd intended, barely more than a whisper. Maria swallowed hard. "Sir, I can explain." "How long?" he repeated, his voice louder now. 6 months, Maria said quietly. "We've been practicing for 6 months. 6 months." Mr. Thornton repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. "You've been teaching my son piano for 6 months. behind my back. I asked her to. Daniel spoke up suddenly, his voice shaking but determined. I begged her to teach me. After you said no, after you said I couldn't learn, I asked Maria if she would teach me in secret. This isn't her fault. It's mine. Be quiet, Daniel, Mr. Thornton said sharply, and he saw his son flinch. He'd always hated how the boy reacted, to his voice like he was constantly expecting to be hurt. Maria stepped forward, placing herself slightly between Mr. Thornton and Daniel. Mr. Thornton, please. Daniel has incredible talent. I know I went against your wishes, and I know I could lose my job for this, but you have to understand what I understand, Mr. Thornton interrupted, his voice cold, is that you deliberately disobeyed my direct instructions. I told Daniel he couldn't learn piano. I had my reasons. Your reasons were wrong, Maria said, and there was a flash of anger in her eyes now. With all due respect, sir, your reasons were wrong. Daniel is gifted. In 6 months, he's learned what takes most students years to learn. He has perfect pitch. He has timing. He has feeling. And all of that was here, waiting, while you told him he wasn't capable of anything meaningful. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mr. Thornton's jaw clenched. Nobody talked to him like this. Nobody questioned his decisions, especially not his employees. You're fired, he said flatly. Pack your things and leave. I'll have your final check mailed to you. No. Daniel jumped up from the piano bench, nearly knocking it over. No, Father, please don't fire her. Fire me if you have to fire someone. Send me away. But don't punish Maria for trying to help me. Daniel, sit down, Mr. Thornton commanded. I won't. Tears were streaming down Daniel's face now. I won't sit down and watch you destroy the only good thing in my life. Maria is the only person in this house who has ever believed I could be something more than just your blind son who you're ashamed of. Those words hit Mr. Thornton like a physical blow. I'm not ashamed of you. Yes, you are, Daniel said, his voice breaking. You can barely look at me. You can't stand being in the same room as me. You travel all the time so you don't have to deal with me. And when I wanted to learn something, when I wanted to try to be good at something, you said no because you thought I'd fail. Because you've already decided I'm a failure. Maria put her hand on Daniel's shoulder. Daniel, it's okay. It's not okay. Daniel was sobbing now. Nothing about this is okay. You're the best thing that's happened to me, Maria. You made me feel like I matter, like I'm not just some burden that everyone has to take care of, and now he's going to take that away too, just like he takes everything away. Mr. Thornton stood frozen, his son's words echoing in his head. He looked at Daniel, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. He saw a 12-year-old boy who was crying not because he was scared, but because he was losing someone who cared about him, someone who had given him hope. And then he looked at Maria, this woman who cleaned his house and asked for nothing, who had spent 6 months secretly teaching his son, not for money or recognition, but because she'd seen something in Daniel that his own father had missed. I need to think, Mr. Thornton said finally. His voice sounded strange, hollow. I need to think about all of this. He turned and walked out of the music room, leaving Maria and Daniel standing there in the heavy silence. He walked down the hallway, up the stairs, past the expensive paintings and the designer furniture, into his home office. He closed the door and locked it. Then Richard Thornton, millionaire businessman, father, widower, sat down at his desk and put his head in his hands. And for the first time since his wife had died 12 years ago, he let himself cry. Maria didn't sleep at all that night. She lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over in her mind. She'd prepared herself for this moment for months, knowing it would eventually come. But nothing could have prepared her for the look on Daniel's face when his father walked out of that room. She'd stayed with Daniel for another hour after Mr. Thornton left, both of them sitting on the piano bench in silence. Daniel had cried until he had no tears left, and Maria had held his hand, not knowing what to say because anything she could say felt like a lie. She wanted to tell him it would be okay, but she didn't know if it would be. When the nurse had come to take Daniel to dinner, Maria had quietly gathered her cleaning supplies and left. She'd driven home in a daze, her mind already calculating how long her savings would last, which bills she could delay, how she'd tell her sister back home that she'd lost her job. But more than her own worries, she kept thinking about Daniel. What would happen to him now? Would Mr. Thornton forbid him from ever touching the piano again? Would he punish the boy for daring to defy him? The next morning, Maria got dressed for work anyway. She knew she'd been fired, but she hadn't officially been escorted out. Maybe she could at least see Daniel one more time, tell him goodbye properly, make sure he was okay. Her hands shook as she pulled into the long driveway of the Thornton mansion. The morning sun made the white exterior gleam, and the gardens looked perfect as always. Everything looked the same on the outside, but Maria knew that inside everything had changed. She used her key to enter through the staff entrance, half expecting the lock to have been changed already. But the key still worked. The kitchen was empty, which was unusual. The cook should have been there preparing breakfast. Maria walked through the quiet house, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. She was heading toward the supply closet to gather her personal items when she heard a voice behind her. "Miss Rodriguez?" She turned to find Mr. Thornton standing in the hallway. He looked different than she'd ever seen him. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loose. There were dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept either. His face was drawn, older somehow than it had been just yesterday. "Mr. Thornton," Maria said, standing up straight. "I came to collect my things. I won't take long. Could you come to my study, please?" His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "I'd like to speak with you." Maria's heart pounded as she followed him down the hallway. This was it. He was probably going to tell her she'd be escorted off the property. Maybe threaten legal action for some breach of contract she'd surely violated. She prepared herself for the worst. Mr. Thornton's study was a room Maria had only cleaned, never entered for any other reason. It was all dark wood and leather furniture, shelves lined with books that looked expensive but rarely read. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Please, sit down." Maria sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She wouldn't beg for her job back. She had her dignity, even if she had nothing else. Mr. Thornton sat down heavily in his own chair. For a long moment he just looked at her, and Maria couldn't read his expression at all. Then, to her absolute shock, his eyes filled with tears. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice cracking. "And I need you to just listen, because if I stop, I don't think I'll be able to start again." Maria nodded, too stunned to speak. "My wife died giving birth to Daniel," Mr. Thornton began, staring at his hands. "The delivery was complicated. They told us there were risks, but we thought everything would be fine. We were so excited to meet our son, and then everything went wrong so fast." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "They managed to save Daniel, but not her. And when they told me my wife was gone and handed me this tiny baby who couldn't see, who would never see, I felt like God had played some kind of cruel joke. I'd lost the love of my life and been given a son who would need constant care, who I'd have to worry about forever." Maria remained silent, though her heart ached hearing this. "I blamed him," Mr. Thornton continued, and now tears were running down his face. "I blamed my own son for his mother's death. I know that's not rational. I know it wasn't his fault. But every time I looked at him, all I could see was what I'd lost. So I stopped looking at him. I buried myself in work. I hired people to take care of him so I wouldn't have to. I convinced myself that he'd never have a normal life anyway, so what did it matter if his father was around or not?" He wiped his face with his hand, looking embarrassed by his own tears. "When he asked about piano lessons, I said no because I was afraid. I was afraid that he'd try and fail, and then I'd have to watch him be disappointed. I'd have to face the fact that I'd given him a life of limitations. It was easier to just say no, to keep him from trying, than to risk watching him struggle." Maria felt tears forming in her own eyes now. "But last night," Mr. Thornton said, his voice stronger now. "Last night I heard my son play piano. Really play, not just hit keys randomly. And I realized that for 12 years, I've been wrong about everything. I've been so focused on what Daniel can't do that I never stopped to see what he can do." He looked directly at Maria now. "You saw it, though. You saw something in him that I was too blind to see, and I'm not talking about physical blindness. You believed in him when his own father had given up on him. You risked your job, your income, everything just to give him a chance." "He deserved that chance," Maria said softly, finding her voice. "Yes, he did. He deserved so much more than I gave him." Mr. Thornton leaned forward. Miss Rodriguez, I didn't ask you here to fire you. I asked you here to apologize and to ask you something. Maria blinked in surprise. Ask me what? I want to hire you. Not as a maid, but as Daniel's piano teacher. A real teacher with a proper salary. I want you to continue working with him, but I want to do it right this time. I'll also hire a professional instructor, someone who specializes in teaching blind students to work with both of you. I want Daniel to have every opportunity to develop his talent. Maria couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mr. Thornton, I'm not a professional teacher. I don't have credentials, or you have something better than credentials, he interrupted.
You have a gift for teaching and you genuinely care about my son.
I've watched you for 5 minutes and I can see what you've done for him in 6 months. You've given him confidence, purpose, joy. Those things don't come from credentials. I don't know what to say, Maria admitted, overwhelmed. Say yes, Mr. Thornton said. Please help me fix what I've broken. Help me learn how to be a father to my son. There was something so raw and honest in his voice that Maria felt her walls coming down. This wasn't the cold, distant businessman she'd worked for. This was a broken man trying to put himself back together. There's something else, Mr. Thornton added. I want to be part of this. I want to learn about Daniel's progress. I want to attend his lessons sometimes if that's okay. I want to hear him play. I've missed 12 years of his life and I can't get those back, but I don't want to miss any more. Maria thought about Daniel, about how much this could mean to him. A father who finally saw him, really saw him, a chance to develop his gift without hiding in shadows. It was everything the boy deserved. On one condition, Maria said firmly. You have to tell Daniel yourself. You have to apologize to him, and you have to mean it. That boy has spent his whole life thinking his father is ashamed of him. You need to fix that. Mr. Thornton nodded, more tears spilling down his face. I will. I'll tell him everything. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to him if I have to. Then yes, Maria said. I'll do it. I'll be Daniel's teacher. Mr. Thornton stood up and extended his hand. Maria shook it, feeling the weight of this moment. Everything was about to change for all of them. Thank you, Mr. Thornton said quietly. Thank you for not giving up on him when I did. Thank you for being brave enough to defy me. Thank you for showing me what I was too afraid to see. As Maria left the study, she felt like she was floating. She couldn't wait to tell Daniel. Couldn't wait to see his face when he learned that he wouldn't have to hide his music anymore. That his father finally understood. Sometimes, she thought, the walls we build around ourselves aren't protecting us at all. They're just keeping us from the people who need us most. 2 years had passed since that emotional day in Mr. Thornton's study, and the mansion had transformed into something Maria barely recognized. The cold, silent hallways now echoed with music and laughter. The music room, once abandoned and gathering dust, had become the heart of the home. Maria stood in the doorway of that same room now, watching Daniel practice. He was 14 years old and his fingers flew across the keys with a confidence that still amazed her. He was preparing for something big, something that would have seemed impossible just 2 years ago. Tonight, Daniel would perform his first major public recital at the city's concert hall. 200 people had bought tickets. Local music critics would be in attendance. It was the kind of opportunity that most young pianists dreamed about for years. How's he doing? A voice said softly beside her. Maria turned to find Mr. Thornton standing there watching his son with an expression of pure pride. The change in him over these 2 years had been as dramatic as Daniel's musical growth. The cold, distant businessman was gone. In his place was a father who showed up, who cared, who tried. He's ready, Maria said with a smile. More than ready. It hadn't been easy, those first few months after everything changed. Mr. Thornton had kept his promise to apologize to Daniel, and Maria had been there when it happened. She'd watched father and son sit together in the music room, Mr. Thornton's voice breaking as he told Daniel everything he'd told her. About the grief, the blame, the fear, the mistakes. Daniel had cried. Mr. Thornton had cried. And slowly, carefully, they'd started to build something that had never existed between them before, a real relationship. Mr. Thornton had also kept his promise about hiring a professional instructor. Professor Chen, a renowned piano teacher who specialized in working with blind musicians, came 3 times a week. At first, Maria had worried that she'd become unnecessary, that a real teacher would replace her. But Professor Chen had surprised her. You've done something remarkable with this boy, the professor had told her after Daniel's first lesson. He has technical skills, yes, but more than that, he has heart. He plays with emotion and understanding that students twice his age struggle to achieve. That came from you, from the way you taught him to feel the music, not just play it. So they'd work together, Maria and Professor Chen, each bringing something different to Daniel's education. The professor taught advanced technique and music theory. Maria continued to nurture the creative, emotional side of his playing, and Daniel flourished under both of them. Mr. Thornton had reduced his travel schedule dramatically. He couldn't be home every day, but he made sure he was there for the important moments. He'd started eating dinner with Daniel every evening he was in town. They'd talk about music, about school, about life. Sometimes Mr. Thornton would sit quietly in the music room while Daniel practiced, just listening. Maria had watched their relationship heal, slowly but surely. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments. Still times when Mr. Thornton didn't know what to say or how to help. But he was trying, and that's what mattered. As for Maria herself, the past 2 years had been transformative. Mr. Thornton had insisted on paying her as a professional teacher. With a salary that was triple what she'd made as a maid, she'd been able to send more money home to her family, save for the first time in her life, and even take some music education courses at the community college. "I'm so nervous I could throw up," Mr. Thornton admitted, pulling Maria back to the present moment. "How are you so calm?" "Because I know your son," Maria said simply. "I've watched him prepare for this. He's going to be incredible." Daniel finished the piece he was practicing and turned toward the door. "Is that you, Father?" "And Maria?" "It's us," Mr. Thornton said, walking into the room. "I just wanted to check on you before we leave for the concert hall." "I'm nervous," Daniel admitted, his hands resting on the keys. "What if I mess up? What if people don't like it?" Mr. Thornton sat down on the piano bench beside his son, something that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. "Daniel, I've heard you play this program 100 times. You're going to be wonderful. But even if you make mistakes, even if everything goes wrong, I'll still be proud of you. Do you understand that?" Daniel nodded, a small smile appearing on his face. "Yeah, I understand. And," Mr. Thornton continued, "I need you to know something else. I'm proud of you not just because you can play piano. I'm proud of you because of who you are. Because you're brave and kind and determined. Because you took a chance on me even after I'd let you down for so many years. You're an amazing kid, Daniel, with or without the piano." Maria felt tears building in her eyes. She'd watched Mr. Thornton practice this speech in his mind for days, working up the courage to say what he really felt. Daniel reached out and found his father's hand. "Thanks, Dad." That word "dad" still made Mr. Thornton emotional every time Daniel used it. For the first 12 years of his life, Daniel had always said father, formal and distant. The shift to dad had been gradual, natural, and it meant everything. Several hours later, Maria stood backstage at the concert hall, helping Daniel with his bow tie. The audience was filing in, the seats filling up quickly. She could hear the murmur of voices, the shuffle of programs, the anticipation in the air. "You've got this," she told Daniel, adjusting his collar. "Remember everything we've worked on. But most importantly, remember why you play. Not for perfection, not for the audience, but because music is part of who you are." "Will you and Dad be in the front row?" Daniel asked. "Front row, center seats," Maria confirmed. "We wouldn't be anywhere else." A stage manager appeared. 5 minutes, Daniel." The boy took a deep breath. Maria gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze, and then she went to find her seat. Mr. Thornton was already there, fidgeting with his program, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him before a business presentation. Maria sat down beside him, and he immediately reached over and took her hand. "Is this really happening?" he whispered. 2 years ago, I didn't think he'd ever touch a piano. Now he's about to perform for hundreds of people. "It's happening," Maria said with a smile. The lights dimmed, the audience fell silent, and then Daniel walked onto the stage, guided by a staff member to the piano bench. The spotlight illuminated him, this young boy who'd been told he couldn't, who'd been hidden away and dismissed. But he wasn't that boy anymore. Daniel sat at the piano, positioned his hands, and began to play. The music that filled the concert hall was extraordinary. Daniel played with technical precision, yes, but also with something deeper. Every note carried emotion. Every phrase told a story. This wasn't just a performance. It was Daniel sharing his heart with everyone in that room. Maria watched Mr. Thornton out of the corner of her eye. Tears were streaming down his face, but he was smiling. She squeezed his hand and he squeezed back. The final piece of the program was the Chopin Nocturne, the same one Daniel had been playing that Wednesday evening when everything changed. As his fingers moved through the familiar melody, Maria thought about how far they'd all come. How much had changed because one person decided to believe in someone everyone else had given up on. When the last note faded into silence, there was a moment of absolute stillness. Then the audience erupted. People jumped to their feet, applauding wildly. Some were crying. The ovation went on and on. Daniel stood and bowed, a huge smile on his face. And then he did something unexpected. He turned slightly toward the audience and spoke into the microphone that had been set up beside the piano. "I want to dedicate this performance to someone," he said, his voice clear and strong. "Maria Rodriguez taught me that being blind doesn't mean you can't see your dreams. She believed in me when nobody else did, not even my own father. She risked everything to give me a chance. Maria, you changed my life. And Dad, thank you for finally letting yourself see what she saw in me all along." The audience applauded again, and several people turned to look at Maria and Mr. Thornton in the front row. Maria felt her face flush with emotion. Mr. Thornton leaned over and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for saving us both." After the concert, people crowded around Daniel, congratulating him, asking about future performances, talking about his incredible talent. Music teachers approached Maria asking about her methods. Several parents wanted to know if she took other students. But the best moment came later, when they were back home sitting in the music room together. Daniel was still in his concert clothes. Mr. Thornton had loosened his tie, and Maria had kicked off her uncomfortable dress shoes. "I can't believe how many people came," Daniel said, still buzzing with excitement. "You earned every bit of that applause," Mr. Thornton said. "I knew you were good, but tonight, seeing how the audience reacted to you, I realized you're not just good. You're exceptional. We make a pretty good team," Daniel said, grinning. "You, me, and Maria, the three of us." Maria looked around the room. At the piano that was no longer silent, at the father and son who'd found their way back to each other, at this new life that had emerged from taking a risk on a lonely boy. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe in someone when they can't believe in themselves. Sometimes love means teaching someone to play the piano even when you've been told not to. Sometimes redemption comes from admitting you were wrong and choosing